And a very warm welcome to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale. The two authors who are going to be with me for the next 60 minutes are sitting right beside me. Ed Stafford has written a book called Walking the Amazon. He's even got a foreword by Sir Ranulph Fiennes, and I can't imagine many people can do better than that for a foreword from a book. Now, it's basically what it says on the tin. He spent 860 days walking from one end of the Amazon to the other. Also with me is Tom Rachman. He's written a book called The Imperfectionists. And it's kind of a book about the decline of journalism, isn't it, Tom? Which is sort of... You must have been quite pleased to publish it around this time.
We knew this was going to happen, so...
Did you?
Yeah, of course.
I don't believe you at all. Right, now, just to tell you that Ed's book is published by Virgin Books in hardback at $17.99, and Tom's book is published by Quercus at the ridiculously cheap price of $6.99 in paperback. Ed, let's start with you. What on earth possessed you? I mean, what gave you the idea of wanting to walk from one end of the Amazon to another, something no one else has ever done?
Well, I think because I've been an expedition leader for a while, I left the military in 2002, and then I've been leading conservation expeditions since then. And then I've been taking film crews into the jungle as well, like the Natural History Unit at the BBC. It wasn't as far out of the norm as it would be if I'd been a banker or something like that, I suppose. And I'd been very used to working for other people, taking other people into the jungle, and I was actually found myself early 30s without a wife, no kids, and thought,
I'll kill myself.
Well, I'm just going to use this experience to do something big, something that, potentially I won't succeed at, but if I do, that I'll be quite proud of and be able to look back on and sort of tell grandchildren type of thing, I suppose.
And it's a pretty life-defining thing to do, isn't it? Because, I mean, sort of reading the book, which I have to tell you, I'm only halfway through, so I haven't got to the end yet.
Right, okay. I die just before the
end. I mean, you're never going to do anything like this in your life again, are you? Isn't it? When you got to the end of it, did you think to yourself, well, what can I do now? How can I top that?
It's a funny thing, isn't it, actually? Because that is everyone's first question is, what are you going to do next?
Sorry to be so unoriginal.
All assume, well, no, you didn't ask that, but everyone does, and they say, well, how are you going to top that? And I think there is a big pressure to go away and therefore be the first person to do X, Y, or Z. But actually, I think the better way of doing it is to look at the positives and look at what just, I don't know, take the things that really work from walking the Amazon and not necessarily go and do something that's even more dangerous, because then, I might well die. I mean, I was contemplating sort of walking the Congo and things, and I think that would up the dangers to a level which is pretty unacceptable, really. So I think it's not falling for that sort of expectation from everyone else and actually doing something that I genuinely want to do that is just a sort of a nice career off the back of this, really.
So take me through how you planned for it, from the time that you made the decision to do it. How did you research it? How did you prepare for it?
Well, it was all a bit unprofessional, if I'm honest.
I don't know. You've got. Let me find this in the first few pages. You've got a 19-point plan here, a checklist which you had to go through before you actually could decide to do it.
Well, that was sort of. I wrote that when I was writing the book. It would have been quite handy to write it when I actually planned the expedition. No, I mean, essentially, there were loads of things that we had to put into place, but the main thing was just getting somebody to give us some money, really, because everyone thought we were going to die, and so actually having people put their name to it and saying, right, here's some money to go and do your daft adventure was the really, really difficult bit. Everything else, once we got the money, fell into place. I was ex-military. Luke, who was the other guy that started it with me, he was an outdoor pursuits instructor, taught climbing and kayaking, and basically we knew that if we'd got the money and we got to the top of the mountain on which the furthest source of the Amazon springs with the rucksacks on, we'd be able to do it. And so it didn't need a huge amount of planning. These sort of things, so many things change, so many things go wrong that you can't plan it all. It's all going to change all of the time. So if we got ourselves to the beginning, then we knew we'd be all right. So
how much money did you need to raise?
Well, I ended up spending £103,000. Wow. But 2.5 years when you're employing guides the whole time, you've got insurance. I mean, our insurance package was 16 grand before we'd even started. So
who on earth would insure you on something like this?
I can't actually remember who the insurers are.
Some very brave people, I think.
But there's the same sort of people that insure polar explorers and people like that, really. But having said that, there's a sensible evacuation plan for polar explorers, but there were no helicopters or any sort of rescue teams for large parts of the Amazon. And we just, Cho was the Peruvian that I walked with for the latter 2 years of the trip. We'd often do these little risk assessments, and it would just, the sort of outcome would come out as unacceptable, and we just sort of giggle at each other and go, oh well.
Well, give us an example.
Well, as we entered Brazil, we ran out of money. Our main sponsors, who had agreed to sponsor the whole expedition, got hit by the financial downturn. They weren't able to pay us, and so we thought we can't let something as dumb as money get in the way of doing this trip. We've been walking for 14 months now, so we decided just to head away from the river, head just straight into the trees, because obviously that would cost less money, and actually walking by the river was surprisingly expensive. You'd go through towns, you pay for accommodation, we were hiring local guides, etc. And so we thought, right, we'll head into the middle of the jungle, but I suppose all of the dangers became exacerbated, really. The river was our safety line, it was our evacuation route, it was where there was help and people. As soon as we walked into the jungle, we were on our own, really, and the further we got away from the river, we just knew that if we got into trouble, were it an envenomated snake bite or a head injury or something that needed medical help within 24 hours, we'd have been dead, and maybe within a week we'd have been dead. So it was one of those things. We just had to accept this sort of unacceptable risk if we were going to do the trip. And
I mean, the way you talk, it seems to me that there's almost an addiction to danger there. And am I right?
I don't think it's an addiction to danger. I mean, a lot of people thought I was crazy because I don't know. I think a lot of people get very wrapped up in not taking any risks throughout life, and I just was more scared. Really, it sounds cheesy, but I was more scared really of not actually living. And they were saying, wow, you're going to spend all of this time away from your real life. And I was like, well, how many more real life experiences am I actually going to have if I put myself in this position where I am coming across tribes of Amerindians where half of them have never seen a white person before, if I am walking through the drugs trafficking area of Peru where everyone's telling me that I'm about to get my head shot off. I mean, I personally think that is really living, and yes, it is a little bit addictive, I have to say, but I don't know. I think the only thing that would actually get more interesting, I think, would actually be going to war or something like that. I think that would be about the ultimate sort of life experience you could have.
What was the most dangerous thing you'd done before you embarked on this?
Well, I'd led expeditions. I'd been out to Afghanistan helping the United Nations. I'd served in the military for 4 years. I'd done a number of things that were fairly hairy, and when we were in Afghanistan, our compound got burned to the ground by angry Afghans, and we had to get evacuated by the US military. I remember it was on CNN, and I rang my mum up just to let her know that I was all right, because it had been all over the news, and she said, "Oh no, it's all right, Edward. I thought that'd be right up your street." So yeah, I suppose I'm quite used to doing these slightly daft, adventurous jobs, really.
Tom, any addiction to danger in your life?
No, I have quite the opposite feeling about danger. I tend to run fast in the opposite direction. But it's interesting, as I'm listening to that, and I've met a lot of people who are like that, journalists I worked with who spent a lot of time in war zones and also aid workers, things like that. And it does have a profoundly addictive quality for some people. I'd be curious, Ed, to know for you whether coming back to London, coming back to sort of civilization, in quotes, that do you find it a bit of an adjustment?
I've been asked that lots as well, but and I was saying no up until quite recently. I think actually yes, it has been a little bit harder than I actually thought it was at first to adjust. It was initially, I suppose, it was hidden because there were huge amounts of positivity when I came back. It got well received, it got well reported in the press, and I think that sort of positivity swept me along. But it is a funny thing readjusting to a life where you don't have to make life-changing or life-threatening decisions or day to day, where actually the consequences of you messing up aren't that you're not going to eat, or that you're going to have serious problems. And I suppose, yeah, I would agree that it does have quite an addictive quality, and you do find a lot of people that have gone on similar trips find it very hard to convey exactly what they went through. And I think, for me it was. I never thought it would be such a life-changing trip. I'd been in the military, I'd done these Afghanistan trips and led jungle expeditions all across the world, and yet for some reason, I think because I'd put myself so far and beyond my actual what I'd experienced so far, was so beyond my own limits that it's quite hard to put your finger on it. But I wouldn't want to have a job in London for the next few years anyway.
Were there times when you almost deliberately placed yourself in a little bit more danger than you probably should have? I mean, I remember once, back in, I think 1991, I was the first British person to go to Beirut after John McCarthy was released as a hostage. And, I mean, clearly quite a dangerous thing to do. It was still, I mean, it was basically rubble, the whole place. And, I mean, I was invited by the Lebanese government to go and speak, believe it or not, on transport privatisation, which sounds ridiculous now. But, I mean, I had SAS guards, and there was a real buzz out of all of this. And I can remember I was offered the chance to go into the centre of Beirut just with a driver on my own, and I had like a typical British sort of suit on, stuck out like a sore thumb, and I was walking down the main street of Beirut thinking, this is madness, but I got a real buzz out of it. And I'd do it again like a shot.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? And we all would, and you say it with a sort of cheeky grin on your face, and it's true. I mean, I was checked out of school for being a naughty boy and all of that, and I think there are a lot of men that, you know, need that excitement in their life, don't they? And or it would be nice to have that excitement in their life anyway. So yeah, I think there is definitely an element of that.
Well, we're going to find out a lot more about Ed's trip up the Amazon in just a few moments' time. If you have a question for Ed or Tom, the number to call is 0845 6060 973. We're talking to Ed Stafford about his book Walking the Amazon. In just a couple of minutes' time, we'll talk to Tom Rachman about his book The Imperfectionists. It's 9:15. And here's the LBC Travel with Alan Joyce.
Thanks, Ian. Well, if you're heading onto the train south...
You're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale. Tom Rachman is here. He's or is it Rachman, or I like to do it the German way?
Either way,
Rachman.
I'm happy with either one. I say Rachman, but if you can say Rachman, I like that.
Yeah, no, I quite like that. I always like a bit of Germanic sound. He's the author of The Imperfectionists, $6.99 by Quercus in paperback. Ed Stafford, Walking the Amazon, with, as I say again, forward by Sir Ranulph Fiennes. You haven't got a forward for your book, have you?
No, I haven't, but if Mr. Fiennes or Sir Fiennes is around...
No, Sir Ranulph.
Okay, thank you. Now he's not going to do it.
He'll say he's in Leicester Square in a minute, won't he? Right, Tom, let's talk about your novel. This is your first novel.
Yes.
I've always wanted to write a novel, but I've never... I started one once, and I wrote sort of a couple of pages, and I found it again the other day and thought, actually, you know, because it was as if I was reading it as if someone else had written it, and I thought, that's quite good. But I don't think I could ever have the discipline to do it, particularly thinking up the plot. Now, some novelists construct the plot before they start, and others just let the characters guide them through the book. What approach do you take?
Well, I think I probably mixed those two approaches, but you're absolutely right to use the word discipline, because I think that certainly in my case that was what led me to the finish line ultimately, that this was something I had wanted to do for many years. I'd always wanted to write fiction, and I went into journalism, and I worked in journalism for many years, and throughout, I had in the back of my mind a hope similar to yours that one day I would really get down to it. So what I did was, when I turned 30, I quit my job as a correspondent in Rome, and I moved to Paris to try to write. And it was agony at first. It really was, because I think I had a false notion of how you write a novel. I expected that I would suddenly find a moment of inspiration. It would gush out, and the pages of the manuscript would.
Is that why you moved to
and
Paris, to get the inspiration?
Probably. I was hoping for a little romantic inspiration too that way. So, in the end, I found that it was just a massive amount of toil, really, and it required many false starts before I finished this one.
And, I mean, as you say, you were a foreign correspondent for Associated Press. You were in Rome. You worked also for the International Herald Tribune. I mean, not a job where you would have thought sort of naturally you would want to write fiction. I mean, if you'd been writing for the News of the World, I could have understood understood your motivation. But did you enjoy it? And are you writing a second one?
Yes, I enjoyed it tremendously. I'm writing a second one now, and I think, though, that's really my motivation for going into journalism was a bit backward, to be honest, because I got into it because I wanted to write fiction. And I felt, though, that at that point I was about 22 years old, and I'd really had far too few experiences, I thought, to write anything remotely interesting. So I thought I needed to see the world, and I needed to improve my writing and read more. And I also needed to support myself, and it seemed that the best job combination I could come up with was foreign correspondent, and so I worked my way toward that. But as I say, always hoping that I would be able to do the fiction.
Now your book is about newspapers. Now, some would say, well, that's the world that you come from. It's a bit of a cop-out to write about something that you already know about. You're not really using your imagination in a way that a traditional novelist would be. You're staring at me with daggers in your eyes.
No,
now.
not at all. Those are those are plastic daggers. No, I don't. In fact, I mean, the book really is, it's set in an international newspaper in Rome, and the way that it's constructed is that it tells the stories of the editors and the reporters and various people who work there, and each chapter tells a different story of a different character there, and each of those chapters is from their perspective, and so that includes, sort of a 70-year-old man, and it includes a 39-year-old woman, and it includes a number of things that I've never been. So I'm not worried about that at all. I did obviously, however, draw on my experiences in the world of the international media, because though this is ultimately a story about characters, I also I thought it would add a nice element to the book if I could give people an insight into what it's really like inside the media, something that I knew, and I thought, particularly in these days, and I'm not talking about the current crisis, but more generally the problems for the traditional print media, it struck me as something that hadn't really been chronicled in fiction yet, and so I thought I would take a crack at it.
Why did you decide on this particular format? As you say, there's 11 chapters, about 11 different individuals. Why did you approach it in that way?
Well, I think that it began that way because I had the characters in mind, really. I had the characters and I had their stories, and that's what inspired me. That's what popped into my head as I was walking around Paris trying to think of what I would write for this novel. And then I needed, however, some common setting to knit their stories all together and to weave them into one book. And so it was really through that I settled on the newspaper setting, one that I thought I could write about authentically. But it wasn't the other way around. It started with those characters.
Brilliant for TV.
Well, the movie rights have gone to Brad Pitt, so we'll see.
Really?
Yeah, so we'll see what happens there.
And he's playing who?
I don't know. We'll see what happens. But
that's very exciting.
Yeah, that's great.
Because I don't know if you probably won't have seen it, but there's a fantastic TV series in this country called The Street. And if you had written a book of the TV series, it's sort of like each episode is about one house and the family within it. So it's kind of a similar format to this. So I'd imagine it could be a sort of 11-part TV series rather than a movie.
Well, after the book came out in the United States, I got contacted by a number of different film and TV producers, and some of them said that they would love to do a TV show instead. And right now there's a screenwriter, the guy who wrote The Fighter. The film was recently nominated for an Oscar. He's writing the screenplay for this. And I was just corresponding with him today via email, and he was talking about how tricky it is in a way to make a single film out of this, because you need to have things like a single protagonist in a movie. So he's struggling with that, but coming up with some nice ideas.
And how much say would you, as the original author, have over the structure of a movie? Or do you just sign away the rights and they get on with it?
Essentially, you sign away the rights, but it's
a huge amount of money, hopefully.
Well, I'm in a good position in my relationship with them, because I've met the people who run the production company, and I've met this screenwriter, and we all get along very well. So, formally speaking, they have no obligation to consult me about anything. They can do pretty much what they want. But in practice, I'm in touch with them regularly, and they ask me, if, let's say the screenwriter is trying to figure out how to do a particular scene, he'll say, what do you think that character would have been thinking? And so that's a bit of fun for me too.
And which is your favourite character from the book?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I think I think something in the process of writing characters, you come to if you're really trying to realize them fully, then you try to get in the head of each one of them, and each one of them is somebody you empathize with tremendously, and you implant a little bit of yourself in every one too, no matter how different they are from you. And so for me to go back and say that this one was my favorite or that one is very difficult. It's sort of like if you were to pick between your children or your pets.
Do you find it easier to write about characters that you personally can empathize with, that you like, or do you quite like writing about characters that actually are a bit wicked? And
I think that the wicked characters, in a way, write themselves a bit more. I mean, they're fun for that reason, because goodness or decency is sometimes harder to demonstrate, and certainly it's less sensational in a book. So I think that a lot of books tend to deal with because they need drama, they tend to deal with misdeeds, and therefore you have a lot of bad characters. So those characters are fun to write. And in this book, there's probably the nastiest character is a foreign correspondent who's just an obnoxious guy who's working in Cairo, and that was I think one of the pleasures of writing the book. I have to say, getting out some of my resentments against the nasty colleagues in that character.
So do you actually implant real people into these characters?
No,
I don't, mixtures of people.
I don't do that for legal reasons, among many others. But
don't believe you.
But you definitely draw from your own experiences, I think, in every aspect of the writing. So there were certainly cases where people were pretty nasty to me, and I remembered it, and I plucked maybe a certain feature out of it. But no, nobody is a particular person in real life.
You're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, Ed Stafford and Tom Rachman.
London's biggest conversation.
And you're listening to the LBC Book Club until 10 o'clock tonight. But coming up from 10, as the hacking scandal enters its third week, Anthony Davis will be taking a look back at today's developments, plus he'll be looking ahead to tomorrow's Select Committee hearings. News International published apologies for the hacking scandal at the weekend, but Anthony will be asking if you would also like to hear an apology from the Murdochs during the committee. Also, debt worries dominated trading on both sides of the Atlantic today, amid fears over America's failure to set a new ceiling for its borrowings. Do you think we should be concerned about the state of America's economy? All that and more with Anthony Davis from 10 o'clock tonight. Well, I'm in the company of Ed Stafford, who's written a wonderful book called Walking the Amazon. It does what it says on the cover, and a very good cover it is too, and I say that as a publisher. And Tom Rachman has written a novel called The Imperfectionists. Rather nattily at the top, it says the international bestseller. No, it's come out in America already. Presumably it was a bestseller in America.
Yeah, it was a New York Times bestseller there. Yeah.
And, I mean, it's your first book. I mean, you must be thrilled. You got bestseller, Brad Pitt buying the movie rights. What more could you possibly want?
Well, they haven't given me a role in the film yet, so no, I've been amazingly lucky. I think, to be honest, my dream really was to one day have published a novel, and that was the end of it. I hadn't really thought beyond that. And the fact that people then read it, and some people liked it, and that I had all this great fortune from it is just... I still sort of look back over the past year or so in a state of shock sometimes.
Well, Ed, let's come back to you for the next few minutes. You've been... How long have you been back?
Nearly a year now.
Nearly a year. Yeah. And are you itching to do another walk somewhere? I mean, you mentioned that you'd considered the Congo and then dispatched that for being too dangerous.
Not really to do another walk, but I do want to go and do... I want to turn this into a career. Yeah, there was the book out of it, there was a TV deal out of it. I do motivational speaks now as a result of it, and it's a nice lifestyle, actually, you know. And
better than having a real job.
It is better than having a real job, yeah. So hopefully I want to deploy on the next expedition in September next year, so I've got a little while before then, and I'm working on TV concepts at the moment, to potentially do a TV programme in the beginning of next year before that. So,
how fit do you have to be to do something like this? Because I know at the beginning of the book you admit that actually both of you were quite unfit at the beginning of it, and your friend Luke was sort of saying, "Oh, don't worry, we'll get fit as we go on." That was a bit of a dangerous thing to rely on.
No, I still believe in that. Actually, I think, you know, if you're going to walk for a year and a half, which is what we thought we were going to be at the time, and you're gonna get fit, and you know you might struggle for the first few days, but it's not the end of the world, and you just put up with it and you keep going. And I think we were so happy when the sponsorship money came through that we spent the last month in London just partying with friends and drinking so much beer that literally I think Luke had about 3 chins on his own. So.
Now tell us about Luke.
Yeah,
what happened?
It's a bit sad. It's the one negative of the whole expedition, really. I mean, I was meant to be his best man at his wedding. He's now married, and his wedding's gone, and I wasn't invited. I tried to get in contact with him about 2 months after I got back, when I was writing the bit in the book about him. I wanted to do his backstory justice, and I wanted to just go to the pub and have a beer and put everything to bed, really. But I was quite sad. I just got a 1-line email response saying I don't want to have anything to do with you ever again. So,
how did it get to that point?
Well,
why did you decide to do this with him in the first place?
Well, he was an expedition leader, and he wanted to kayak the Amazon. We actually bumped into each other after having not seen each other in about a year, out in Belize, and we were in a bar, and he'd got this idea to kayak the length of the Amazon. It'd been done 5 times before, and it would have taken about 5 months to do. I'd got this idea to walk the Amazon, but they were sufficiently similar for me to cajole him into going, actually, Luke, no one's ever walked the length of the Amazon before.
You're a bit big for a kayak, aren't you?
Well, I'm rubbish at kayaking, actually, and I can walk. So, so I convinced him to walk it, but, because we were so snowballed in this enthusiasm that we'd actually found other people that were stupid enough to go and do this type of adventure, we probably neglected to look at each other's characters, I suppose, sufficiently, and look at the relationship sufficiently, and we just had really different ways of looking at things. I think if he had kayaked it would have been a bit of a jolly, you'd have sped down the river, you'd have had nights out in the towns as you went by, but actually walking it was quite a grueling experience, really. Every single danger you really have to tackle head on, because you are walking straight through those tribes, and you have to convince them that you're not a threat, and therefore it was a very, very different experience. And so, and he, as I said, he also got engaged just before he left, so I think his heart wasn't necessarily in it, and that ended up in this sort of niggly relationship where literally the way Luke drank his coffee in the morning and had to really concentrate on it would just really piss me off, and so it was petty, it was pathetic. But I equally, when I got back in contact with him, thought that this is stuff that happens under the pressure of expeditions.
But I mean, he basically left after 3 months.
He left after 3 months, yeah.
And what led up to that decision on his part?
It was just a series of niggles. We both became all consumed in sort of this frustration at each other, and I think, and how relationships can get all consuming. This is 2 guys who have spent best part of 4 months, if you include the recce at the beginning of the expedition, together 24 hours a day, and it just got horrible. It got petty. It got spiteful. And he actually, when he left, said, "I'm leaving because I want to try and keep in contact what we've got left of this friendship," which is a bit bizarre, because we haven't really got any of that left anymore.
It's really sad, actually, isn't it?
It is a bit, yeah. It is. Well, as I said, it's the one big negative of the expedition. The positive that I draw from it is that actually, when he left, the whole thing became so much more exciting. I think to go through that with a mate, you would have had that person to joke about everything with, and to put things in context, and to develop this sort of black sense of humour. But do it on your own, and I was for the next 3 weeks or so after he left. There was a number of different times when I was walking with different Amerindian guides that can pay people to walk from one tribe to another, and it was quite an unsettling period. And I think, because you were the only Westerner, and my Spanish was awful at the time as well, and a lot of the tribes you were walking through, they all spoke different dialects, indigenous dialects. It was such a baptism of fire for me that it became this far more intense experience, and therefore a more interesting story.
Did you contemplate giving up as well? Because it must have been quite a decision to go on by yourself. Well, okay, you have a guide all the time with you, but
well, it went through my head. Definitely. I mean, when Luke told me he'd leave, we were right at the bottom of this canyon called the Aparimac Canyon, deepest canyon in the world, 3 kilometres from the river at the bottom to the top of the mountains, and it was I just felt so small. Literally, it was just, it was just, wow, am I really deciding to do this on my own? And so I did contemplate going home, but I don't know, I figure it's like if you say you're going to play rugby on a Saturday afternoon, and
I've
you
never
go
decided
out,
that.
and you go out and get drunk on a Friday night, and you wake up in the morning and you're hideously drunk and you don't want to play. You've said you'll play, and you've got the commitments and the responsibilities, so you just have to go and play. And I think it was the same sort of thing. I'd shouted about this beforehand. I'd got a website, I'd got charities, and I just thought it would be embarrassing to come home, really.
Now, you mentioned dealing with the local people. You didn't speak the language. Some of them had never seen a white man before. Tell us a couple of experiences that you had.
Well, there were 2 big threats. The first was the red zone, which is the drug trafficking area of Peru. Like 2/3 of the world's cocaine is grown in this area. Then it gets shipped up to Colombia for processing, but it actually comes out of this area that the headwaters of the Amazon go through, and that also spills into this area of very, very closed off indigenous tribes, and they've been through horrendous times in living memory, where the Shining Path, the communist guerrilla movement that swept through Peru, when they came through, if the indigenous guys didn't join them, they got massacred, and so whole generations of men got wiped out, whole generations of women got violated, and not surprisingly, they now live in this very defensive, closed-off manner. And so walking through as a white man with a video camera on your shoulder was a bit of a threat, and we got detained at Arrow Point on various times. I got accused of murder because somebody had gone missing in the village, and I was the only white face, and therefore I'd definitely done it. But it was all vaguely comical in a way. If I'd been with other people, I probably would have seen the funny side of it more at the time. But like this the grilling that I got from the chief of police being a guy in a grass skirt in an indigenous community, was he was saying to me that my passport wasn't valid because the Queen hadn't personally signed it, and it was farcical. The whole thing was completely farcical. But in other incidences,
how'd you get out of that one then?
It was just, I just had to literally laugh at it and say, come on, this is ridiculous. And actually, the next morning, after they'd been detained overnight, the real chief of police did arrive, and he took one look at us and smiled and went, these guys aren't murderers, and off you go. But there were other instances where they were genuinely really, really angry, and, you know, we were detained at Arrow Point on a couple of occasions, but by tribes that genuinely were absolutely furious that I was trying to come through their tribal area, and it was very difficult to get permission from every single tribal chief. They all consider themselves autonomous. They all get hugely offended if they've not been asked permission. There's an HF radio system that links all the communities together, so where possible we were calling ahead to ask for permission, but some of the guys were just saying no. So when they did say no, sometimes we'd have to change sides of the rivers just to try and continue advancing, and at other times we literally had to try and sneak through, and when that didn't work, then you get very, very angry people. But the way around it actually was to hire indigenous guys. We had two Ashaninka guys that ended up walking with us. They were called the Dongo Brothers, and I thought they'd walk with us for about 3 days, but they walked with Cho and me for 47 days, and they became really good friends, and you know, at the end of the 47 days, I thought they were, because I paid them to walk with me, I thought they were going to get horrendously drunk, because these indigenous guys don't have a massive tolerance for alcohol, and I'd paid them this huge amount of money, but they didn't actually. They bought an outboard motor for their village, and they went home really happy. But
how responsible.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
I mean, there aren't many explorers left in Britain now. I mean, 100 years ago, I guess there was a much more of a pioneering spirit, and there was much more of the world left to discover. There's very, very few places that people haven't been. I just come back from Northern Australia, and I know that I was walking in places that no human had probably walked before, and it is quite a funny feeling, that, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think I was born in the wrong age, though. I think we have such amazing opportunities now. I mean, maybe before you needed to be fairly upper class and had a lot of money behind you. Now, you know, you really just need to get a plane ticket and go to some remote parts of the world, and you can do amazing adventures. And I thought mine was an amazing sort of juxtaposition of an old school expedition, and yet I was taking an internet satellite link, which meant that I was tweeting daily. You know, I just had to find a fallen tree in the middle of the jungle, and therefore the corresponding hole in the jungle canopy above me, and I'd point this unit up, and we had broadband connection to the rest of the world. I was doing sort of live interviews with CNN International, getting broadcast to 240 international territories from this little bit of kit that I had in my rucksack. I knew Michael Jackson was dead within 2 minutes of it being announced on the internet.
But you see, that I think is, well, it's not cheating, but you're sort of, you're not actually at one with the area that you're in.
No, you're just sucked into. You've got this window of the Western world for the sort of 20 minutes of battery power that you've got left, that you can have this communication. But I justify it really because I think in the modern day, if you don't broadcast these things, if you don't blog about them or make videos about them or whatever, they end up being just purely selfish ventures. And we had schools all around the world following the expedition, so they'd go on into a geography classroom and upload the interactive map and see where I've got to, and ask me questions about what animals I'm seeing and about the rainforest, and therefore use it as a sort of educational tool. So it then becomes a bit more meaningful than this balls out boys own adventure, really.
Well, more from Ed in a moment, and also more from Tom Rachman, who will tell us more about his book The Imperfectionists. This is LBC 97.3. It's 9:45. And here's Alan Joyce with the travel.
Thanks, Ian. On the train, South West train still...
And welcome back to the LBC Book Club. I'm in the company of Tom Rachman, who's written a novel called The Imperfectionists, and Ed Stafford, who's written about his experiences walking the Amazon. Now, Ellie Thousand has tweeted to say, very encouraged to hear from Tom Rachman that writing a successful novel isn't an easy task. Well, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, wouldn't they, I guess, Tom? And Joanne in Bromley has texted to say, Ed Stafford, I bow to you. I read about you and your journey. Please tell me, how did you keep sane on your journey when when you felt like you were losing your mind?
I didn't actually, if I'm honest. I didn't deal with it terribly well at all. I think everyone always told me that the hardest bit would be the top 2 inches, the mental side of it, rather than the physical side of it. But I ignored that rather arrogantly and didn't do any medical training, and as a result suffered hugely. I really had huge spells of negativity. Definitely I was depressed for large parts of the expedition, and I really didn't take it seriously, to the extent that about 4 months before the end of the expedition I had to actually use the satellite phone to call up an NLP guru, a neuro-linguistic programming expert, just to try and get some tips on how to break out of this sort of cycle of negativity that I was getting into, because I was so focused on getting to the end that the most minor thing would happen during the day that would slow us down or whatever, and I would just spiral into this real negativity. And he was a great help, actually. He was able to just say, it's not surprising you're actually finding this quite difficult. You've been cut off from society for such a long time. And he just gave me a few sort of tips, really, to help me regain perspective, make me realise that each one of these tiny little problems isn't actually that serious, and that if I actually just relax and enjoy the day, then I'll still get there, you know.
Is it a bit like writing a novel, Tom, where you are a bit cut off? Did you do it over a long period of time, or was it an intensive experience where at points you may have got a bit depressed, thinking, well, am I ever going to finish this?
Yeah, it was quite like that. Also, the publishers often approached me at arrow point, so we have something in common there. No, it was I think that there were moments when one it becomes terrified. You have no idea. Also, at that point, I hadn't sold the book. I didn't know if I was investing all of my savings, all of my hopes, years of ambitions in a project that was going to go absolutely nowhere. So it was terrifying, actually, and I felt like, in a way, it was part of the work, quite aside from the writing itself, was trying to maintain a balance between confidence and self-doubt, and that you're swinging between the one side and the other, and probably too much of either is deadly.
Now, you set the book as an English language newspaper. Why did you set it in Rome?
Well, I had
apart from the fact that you knew Rome.
Yeah, I mean, that was really why. There were probably two main reasons. One was that I had worked as a foreign correspondent in Rome for the Associated Press, so it was a city that I felt I could describe well, and I knew what it was like to be a reporter there, and I knew that I knew the expat scene there quite well. So that was part of it. Also, I had subsequently worked at the International Herald Tribune in Paris, and I didn't want the book to appear to be just a thinly veiled Herald Tribune. So I thought, if I set it in Paris, it's going to look suspicious. I'll put it in Rome. I'll imagine it as a sort of minor, struggling newspaper, and that's really how it evolved.
Do you think all newspapers are going to struggle now?
I think that almost all of them are. I think that we don't even need to look into the future. I think that there are almost none that are doing well at the moment. And it's been such a slow and steady decline, and one that nobody has really found a satisfactory answer to yet. I think that's why publishers must be secretly terrified, whatever they say in public. There's just been no answer to the shift online, and the amount of money that they're earning from online, even when they claim lots and lots of readers, doesn't offer even a fraction of what they used to get in print.
And there's a real danger, I think, that if that trend continues, that we won't actually get much investigative journalism. Yes, you'll still get reporting, you'll still get an increasing amount of comment, but where the Sunday Times in this country have what they call their insight team, which must cost a huge amount of money to keep going, in the future, things like that probably won't exist, because the owners will say, well, sorry, we've got to divert the resources elsewhere.
I think that investigative reporting will always exist because of the fact that it's so valuable to people, to societies, and I think that ultimately people will pay for it. But I think you're absolutely right in a more general way, which is that there will just be less reporting. There'll be less fresh information available, and there will be more commentary, and you see that already, because commentary is cheap. I mean, you can find somebody who's opinionated, stick them in a room with a microphone, or with
why are you looking
laptop.
at me when you say that?
Or with a laptop. You can look at me then.
Cheek.
And you've got your work. You don't need to send people out to reporting, which is a very expensive business. So, unfortunately, that trend is already seen. I think that recently I read that The Guardian had announced that in the future it's going to shift to a greater amount of commentary in its pages, and it didn't cite financial reasons for it, but one assumes that's probably part of it.
Well, they run a site called Comment is Free, so I suppose that's why they might do it. Do you see your future in journalism or in writing?
Well, I see my future in writing, but writing viewed in a broader way. I think that for many years, probably since the war, really, the two professions of journalism and fiction writer have split in a way that they weren't necessarily before that. That many of the greats in the pre-war period, whether you're thinking of Orwell or War or many others, Hemingway and so forth, they did journalism and they also wrote fiction, and that was what inspired me, really. That I wanted to be a writer in a broad sense, and I continue to write occasional pieces of journalism, but I'm simultaneously working on my next novel, and I hope in the long term to be able to combine the two. You
ever thought of writing a novel, Ed? That's where the money is. It's the only way in publishing that you ever make money is either to sell a book extract to a newspaper for a huge amount of money, or to write a successful novel. There is no other way of making money, particularly for an author as well as a publisher. All the experiences you must have had, you could probably write quite a good plot just like that.
I could probably do quite a good autobiography, actually. There's a bit of a checkered history there. But no, I've never considered writing a novel, no.
And what's your second one about, Tom?
I can't tell you that.
Because you'd have to kill me.
I'd have to kill you. No, it's coming along, but it's too early in the process to talk about it. But this time it's not about journalists, although there is a great deal of material looking at the headlines these days.
Do you think it's more of a challenge to write a second novel than a first? Because you've always got something to live up to. It's like sort of whatever Robbie Williams released after Angels, it was never going to be quite as good as that, was it?
Thank you for comparing me to Robbie Williams.
Well, anytime.
No, I think that there are different pressures.
And through it all.
I think the pressures are just different. I mean, the pressure of the first one is, I think, fundamentally a worse pressure, because that is the pressure of not knowing if anybody will even care. That's worse.
But how did you make them care? Because I bet there are loads of people listening to this programme now who maybe have written a novel and it's sort of in a dusty drawer somewhere because they didn't know how to get it published or just didn't have any success. What did you do? I mean, apart from the quality of your writing, obviously, what did you do to get a publisher interested?
Well, I wish there was some sort of magical trick to it. The way I did it was I went online and I did research for an agent first, for an agent who represented authors whom I admired and whose careers I thought looked pretty good. So I contacted them, and I ended up with the agent who represents Jonathan Franzen among other American authors. And her reputation is so good that when she hands out a manuscript, people pay attention. So the first step, the most important step, perhaps, was getting the right agent.
Because that in itself is quite a difficult thing to do, though, because agents have dozens of manuscripts that descend on them every day, and they have to wade through them to find a good one, I guess. And was there any sort of special thing that you did to make yours stand out?
No, I've heard of people sending biscuits and things like that, and other bribes, but I didn't.
I just find money. I mean,
money is also
in my other life,
bribe.
I'm a
It
publisher,
works.
so I just find money talks, really.
No, I didn't do anything particularly brilliant that way. I just sent an email and I got lucky. It took a while. I mean, you're right. They have these notorious slush piles that I imagine go from the floor to the ceiling, and I suppose that if you write something, and I'm not talking about the manuscript, I'm talking about just the email at this point, and maybe the synopsis and an excerpt that grabs their attention, then you've got a chance.
Well, I think I should make clear I do not publish fiction, so any of you that are thinking of sending me a novel manuscript, don't bother, because we don't publish it. Well, it's absolutely fascinating to talk to you about your books. Ed, I hope you do go on another expedition, because your book is absolutely fascinating. As I say, I'm only halfway through it, and I am going to finish it, I can assure you. Cool. So I hope you go on another expedition purely so you can write another book and you can come back on the programme and tell us about it. Thank you. Let me give you the book details again, because you'll want to go and buy them, I know. Tom Rachman, The Imperfectionists. It's The New York Times says it's nothing short of spectacular. Vogue says a crackling debut novel. Rich, tragicomic. Financial Times, funny, poignant, breathtaking. It's on the front cover. Normally you'd have those on the back cover. It's sort of a bit brash. Ed Stafford, Walking the Amazon. $17.99 in hardback with a forward by Sir Ranulph Fiennes. Virgin Books. Available at all good bookshops and probably quite a few bad ones as well. It's a big day on LBC tomorrow. Hope you'll join me from 7. Thanks to both my guests. Coming up next, the one and only Anthony Davis.
We're ready for takeoff.